Good afternoon. It is 4:34 on a Friday afternoon. Council, we're here for the Bastrop Drainage Master Plan workshop. We're going to turn it over shortly to our city manager and to our consultants, but I want to remind everybody that if you're not talking on your microphone, please turn it off so that we won't get any feedback and other non-desirable things. So, Madam City Manager.
Do we have any citizen comments?
Do we have any citizen comments? We have none, and Mr. Crouch has shown up, and we glad he made it out of Austin. So now we have a full dais.
Thank you, Mayor. This presentation you're going to hear has been ongoing by Half and Associates regarding drainage. As you are aware, we have yet to adopt a final drainage master plan. This is a step toward that adoption. Half, and there is another consultant, Next Gen, who has done some of the financial implications to this master plan, and he should be joining us here in a minute. We have representatives from Half who will be presenting. Fabiola, as the city engineer, will have oversight of any projects the council decides need to come out of the plan. This plan was taken during it was a snapshot in time. Things have already changed since that snapshot. So very much like the transportation impact fee that you heard the other day, it comes with a price tag. All of those things need to be taken into consideration as we move forward and see what the impact is to the residents and then also to new development. So I will turn it over to Half an.
Okay, just to give you a little bit of background on the project, this was to perform a study to identify drainage problems and to reduce flood risk for property owners and businesses, and also to develop a final drainage master plan. And this is what we're here to discuss tonight, with also the possibilities for funding. Council authorized a professional services agreement with Half back in October of 2021. We issued a notice to proceed on November 2021, and we started working on the project, developed a questionnaire, and kicked off the project with a public meeting on January of 2022, and open up this questionnaire survey to the public for them to respond. This questionnaire was open until March of 2022. We received 81 responses, and the detail of the responses are included in the master plan report for your, in case you want to look at the details. Half is here today to present the findings and hear your comments and questions. So we have Stephen Crawford and Marita Moya with Half today.
Hi, guys. As Fabiola mentioned, my name is Marita Moya. I work at Half, and I was the project manager for the Drainage Master Plan. With me, I have Stephen Crawford. He is our Director of Water Resources Practice in our Austin office. And I'd also like to introduce Matthew from NewGen. They're a subconsultant to us to help with the drainage fund study. So we'll kind of go over the multiple pieces that went into the Drainage Master Plan. So kind of to start off, I wanted just to kind of briefly reflect on what a Drainage Master Plan is and kind of the intent. So really it's to establish a really comprehensive evaluation of what existing conditions for drainage and flood risk looks like for the city. Once we look at the existing condition, flooding, we can assess then mitigation solutions. So as part of the DMP, we were able to leverage what previously the city had already invested into studying. So Gills Branch and Piney Creek, we were able to leverage previous studies, and we also were able to do an evaluation of Copperas Creek. That's the furthest watershed, kind of on your easternmost extents, and then Pine Forest Creek, and as well as Spring Branch. And so we looked at those 5 different riverines as part of the DMP to kind of look at what those existing floodplain 100-year extents are. In addition to that, we did a rapid assessment, which we'll also discuss as part of the results in establishing what we thought the risk looked like for the city. And then after that, we kind of go into developing those mitigation solutions. And really, the city kind of pursued a DMP really because the city has recently experienced historic flooding. Gills Branch is definitely one of the ones that has repeatedly caused a lot of flooding concerns for downtown Bastrop, and really a lot of increased population. So you have more residents that are experiencing this on a day-to-day basis or year-to-year. And really, as part of the DMP, we're able to look at the infrastructure, as, obviously you can continue to grow, drainage infrastructure ages, and so therefore, over time, it potentially needs to be replaced. And all these things kind of come together to help Bastrop continue to grow and be safe from flood risk. So just something I wanted to kind of highlight is the kind of timeline here of steps that kind of go into projects as you kind of inception to bid and construction. Really, a master plan is that very first step. So a lot of these projects are just identified as flood risk and potential mitigation solutions, but really that next step would be to carry them through feasibility and onward into design. So, so I did want to kind of briefly talk about each of these stages in a little bit more detail. We started off, as Fabiola mentioned, in January of 2022. And really that kind of started with data collection. So one big effort we completed as part of the DMP was establishing survey for all storm drain infrastructure within the city. This is going to be the foundation of just understanding what is out, what is in the ground for storm water. So we do have a database that kind of helps quantify and spatial kind of ground truth what is in the what storm drains are in the ground. And with that, we did that flood risk assessment for existing conditions. And really that kind of led us to identify what those drainage problems are. One of the big goals of a DMP is to kind of identify where we think people are experiencing the most flood risk and flood problems. And then once again, kind of moving into having a solution to how we can reduce flood risk. And that's kind of when we move into those CIPs, so capital improvement plans.
These are actual statesman pictures of Bastrop?
Just this one right here. This was after the Gills Branch flood. I found some photos. These are taken by HAF on field reconnaissance, and this one as well. This is in Piney Creek. This is SH-95. And then once we identify the solutions, we also went and we were able to do a cost analysis to be able to know how much, the funding that would take to do the solutions. And with that, we were able to rank and prioritize them. That kind of helps give a kind of a stepping stone for the city to be able to use in the future to continue to invest in their storm drain infrastructure. So as I mentioned, we evaluated flood sources, both riverine and local. So you can kind of see the map here kind of shows what that 100-year floodplain looks like as far as the results of the DMP. With that, we evaluated things such as structure flooding, so if a home or a property is impacted, street flooding, knowing which streets are passable or don't cause danger to road traffic during storms, as well as kind of what are people experiencing in their front, anything from like the drainage in their front door window, So we kind of looked at all these components, and with that, we also overlaid all the data for flood risk areas that we had collected. Really with this population of data, spatially we're able to kind of ground truth the results we were seeing in our models. Just a couple of things I did want to note. When we kicked off the project, we worked closely with the city to kind of know what known areas were of risk and concern, just the locations that people get commonly call in for. We also took the resident questionnaire. This was the questionnaire that we did right after our public meeting at the beginning. We are only showing any questionnaire results that resulted in flooding that a resident reported as far as their response.
What are we identifying as critical structure?
Yes. So schools are considered critical structures, which I think is specifically what's being demonstrated in downtown Bastrop.
Thank you.
Yes. Another thing we looked at was a May 2018 storm event. The city of Bastrop did collect a lot of good data for that as far as which properties reported flooding. And so we were able to populate, once again, if there was a structure that was reported as damaged and therefore was a loss. So all these things kind of helped ground truth what the results were saying as far as what is risk within downtown or for the city of Bastrop. So I think one thing in the map you saw, the city of Bastrop had a lot of flooding that was showing as risk. That was populated by a 2D rapid assessment. Sorry. And so that's really just a rain on mesh simulation where we take rainfall, we put it on a surface, and we can watch the overland patterns of flow through the modeling. This is really just to be able to see how does flow behave once rain begins. And so I had a video here. This is Gills Branch in downtown Bastrop. So you can kind of see especially through here, this is like very flat area. So it does have a tendency to flow all the way down here, kind of moving towards this culvert at SH 71 to the south. So it's just a lot of ponding. Similar Gills Branch, as you guys are aware, it does overflow. But one thing, even with the overflows from the actual riverine, local flooding does pond kind of where that naturally, that railroad kind of is a little higher ground. So this was a good indicator of just what those general flow patterns look like. And with that, we were able to identify 16 what we considered flooding hotspots, or just more concentrated flow to be able to discuss with the city. And with that, we were able to kind of talk about which ones do we think would be the best areas to pursue potential solutions. And so one thing in particular is we are aware that the roads along Gills Branch are overtopped. I think Gills Branch does start to overflow even at the 25-year event. So there is a lot of risk associated at a lot of those structures. So we did circle, all of those. So that was part of the identification of properties as well as road crossings that we're seeing flood risk.
Go ahead.
So the flood, the changes to the drainage rules that happened post flood event, post large event, do have more stringent requirements in the Gills Branch area. The city did approve some, so you do have to mitigate. I'm gonna just tell you guys, this does not take into account B3 density or impervious cover. So if you think it's blue now.
So I had a couple of questions. If you don't mind, if you could go back a couple of slides to probably the one with that one. Yeah, good deal. So I know that you said that the gold dot was school. And then how did you identify the purple dots? Was that actually residents calling in a flooded structure?
No. So the purple dots are purely off of a riverine analysis. So basically based on and actually these floodplains are now effective according to the FEMA's NFHL. So those are structures in the current 100-year floodplain for Gills Branch and Piney Creek.
And the latest FEMA report is based on, wasn't it adopted in 2019 or 2020? Okay. And the only reason I'm asking is because I've been here through 2 or maybe 3 of the big flood events, and I know that we didn't do a very good job of maintaining the drainage ditches and the pathways out of here. And I think that's what caused a lot of the evaluation that was done, because there was things clogged up, and so the water came up and people got stuff in their houses because of lack of maintenance. One of those pictures that you showed of the Highway 95 crossing was a very good example of not maintaining the drainage ditches coming out and getting the water out of here. So I'm just curious if the data that you've got was based on where did it stop? What year did it stop at? Or do you have any idea?
As far as the data, all data is to date. I guess basically land use was existing. So when we started the project, we evaluated the land use as existing conditions. Rainfall would be the latest and most used commonly in our industry right now, which would be the Atlas 14. That was released in 2019. So actually the effective maps that are on FEMA's National Flood Hazard Layer is accounting for Atlas 14 rainfall.
Okay, so it accounts for the latest FEMA information. Oh, okay, thank you.
And just to add to that, I think you're looking for the maps that were recently approved by FEMA with the new available data. Those were adopted in May of this year.
Okay, thank you.
The structure flooding, was that from a flood report to FEMA?
This purple dots? No, this was just part of the DMP, but it is using the FEMA's 100-year floodplains.
So it's listed as a flooded structure, but it may not have flooded through a FEMA claim?
Correct.
Okay, so it's just anticipated that it would flood in
Yes.
a 100-year event, I assume?
Okay, yeah, thanks. That's what I was trying to get at
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
with all my questions, thanks.
I'm not trying to jump too much forward, but since the May 2018 flood, because I walked Gills Branch back in April, which I could absolutely see so many issues. I mean, what have we done since that storm? I'm not probably asking you, I'm probably asking the city. What have we done to mitigate the problem since the 2018?
I know that we've purchased equipment, and Curtis, you can probably back me up on this or confirm it. But I know that a couple of years ago, we purchased some equipment to help dig the ditches out. And then I know that they've started up at 95, I think, and it kind of worked their way to the river from 95. And so that's one reason I was kind of curious as to when the data was collected, because I know that since you've the city staff has cleaned those and maintained those ditches a lot better than they did previously, that that flow through there is going to be a lot better and might not clog up as bad. You still got pinch points, which the areas that you had red circled are really the pinch points, like at the railroad crossing across the street where the Fayette Street comes through some really small pipes and can't get across the river, so it's going to flood and come over. But if those pipes are clogged with a pallet or a lazy boy or whatever, then it's going to
Yeah.
it's
'Cause
going to
that's
come
what I
across the
saw.
road. And so
Yeah.
I think that was a lot of our problem, not to say that Bastrop is going to ever be free from flooding, but I think maintenance was a big piece of our problem before, and I think that we've taken the steps to correct a bunch
Excellent.
of it with the equipment that they've bought, and then with their just process that they have now is a lot better than what we were doing when it flooded.
Yeah, there were quite a few homeless camps when I walked. The giant culverts had people so...
Now?
Oh, no, back in April when I walked. So that's good to know that we... Yeah.
All right, so once we established that existing conditions, we did proceed to look at those drainage solutions. And with that, it really can and kind of looking at those road crossings. What will it take to convey a 100-year storm to make a road drivable? And then if a 100-year wasn't feasible, just due to like how much capacity it needed, we did look at lower frequencies when appropriate. Another thing was the channel improvements. One of the big things that the city currently has is the Gills Branch design, so that was included in the plan. And then a big one was the storm drain improvements, was trying to look at what is the current storm drain infrastructure within the city and what kind of capacities would it need in the future should flooding continue to occur. So we looked at 5 riverine solutions and 5 local solutions in total. All of these are in the red boxes, kind of correlate to a project that's within the plan. And each project had a summary sheet, so it's kind of like a quick summary of what the project was, the purpose of the project, what benefits it really would bring, as well as challenges, anything that would potentially cause a challenge and maybe halt the project, to kind of just make sure we understand, if it were to be pursued, anything that could cause it to, stop or be delayed. And then we also had some quick facts as far as those benefits of the project score, which we'll kind of go over the ranking too, as well as any houses or roads that became passable, things of that nature. So those are all in the plan in the appendix, so you can look at each of the 10 solutions there. And this is our project scoring matrix. Really, the matrix is going to be really helpful for the city in the future. It's meant to kind of be a live document in a sense. You can always change those rankings and how you want to weight each of the categories. But the categories we looked at were public safety. Did we decrease flooding to a lower, increase the level of service during a storm event for whatever we were mitigating? We also looked at the cost of it. Environmental impacts is typically if there was a need for permitting that could potentially impact the project. Project timing was also considered, if it would be anything, if it was dependent on another project, or if it would have any other sort of constraints kind of with those challenges. And then lastly is social. We did take into consideration if the project would potentially be impacted or could be included in another comprehensive plan that's ongoing in the city, as well as the benefits to the residents. So all of these were weighted. We talked with the Fabiola and the city staff through the process to kind of make sure we honed it in to try to cater it towards the city's needs. But ultimately, these are the rankings of the projects. So you can see here, each of the mitigation projects here are listed, in which case the order of them as well, as far as kind of weighing in all those categories of benefit.
So these 11 projects are approximately a total of 125 million.
I did want to mention, we also have operations and maintenance. So similar to what you were discussing, we did talk to Curtis about ongoing efforts and maybe needs. So we did have a creek maintenance plan where just kind of having that annual and effort to make sure the creeks are cleaned as well as maintained. We also added a storm drain evaluation. This would include maybe a CCTV, like a closed circuit TV analysis, to be able to see the condition of the pipes. That could also benefit and help the city hone in on which systems could be ranked as more high priority. And then lastly is the drainage criteria review. As you mentioned, the city has taken a lot of steps to help manage the development that's ongoing, in particular in the Gills Branch watershed. But this is something that can also be revisited and improved to help, once again, help regulation and requirements to develop in Bastrop.
I have a question. For the detention pond at Hunter's Crossing, does the HOA have some type of storm management fee to maintain that pond, or is that city responsibility? There's no, the HOA doesn't have a storm management, okay. Thank you.
There's a, I think, is it the PID you're asking about?
Yes.
There is a PID.
Well, no, actually, I was thinking about the HOA, but the HOA doesn't, there's no storm management fee that's billed through the HOA?
Nothing at all.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing at all. Two-thirds of the cost of that is for Gills Branch. Is there any of those projects, and excuse my ignorance on this, but is there any of those projects that either enhance or diminish the capability of the other projects? I mean, does it accelerate any of the other projects as we fix a problem, say at Gills Branch, or mitigation improvements? Does it provide a benefit or deficit for the Piney Creek or for another portion of Gills Branch?
So one thing about the mitigation improvement is, I guess, a couple of things. So hopefully I'll answer all those questions. It will provide a benefit. We did look at if Gills Branch was constructed, what did that local rapid assessment look like? So we did take that into consideration as far as looking at potential locations that needed flood risk reduction. I will say that, and we wrote this in the plan, Gills Branch does have to occur before the benefits of SH 95 at Gills Branch could be feasible. And so that's kind of why it's so low, but it's really because it's going to be kind of tagged on to the benefits that Gills Branch mitigation would see. Otherwise, I would say that all of them they relatively stand alone, but I will say local drainage wise, each of these, right now, all the system is relatively connected and has 1 to 2 outfalls. So it would be probably necessary for the city to kind of look at that systematically as far as how to, start on the downstream end and then work your way upstream. Another thing that we didn't do in this list, but we could phase that out. So that's not something you would have to eat it all at one time. You could do certain blocks and or streets as maybe they are advanced in the transportation side or public works. So there is opportunity to approach those in many different ways. But I would say that we try to write in the plan too, if one would need to occur for the other one to see benefit. And that would be probably for a lot of the storm drain ones. They do kind of influence each other.
Are you going to go through each one of those 11 items?
No, I was
Okay,
not.
good, because that
Okay.
I was going to ask a couple of questions if you're going to go through a bunch of them. So the first one is actually probably the most current construction that we've had, right? So Hunter's Crossing, all the other stuff is old, has been here for 100 years. Hunter's Crossing is the newest one, and that's number 1 on the list. So as we're bringing stuff on, because that's also where all our development is, it's all coming to that piece, and maybe that's why it's scored number 1. And is that detention pond, is it creating a new pond at Hunter's Crossing, or is it just making the ponds that are there deeper, or a combination, or
So we
all
did
the
look.
above?
No, actually, we did look at that. Right now, with the structure that's in place, the weir does see overflow of that Hunter's Crossing. So we looked at resizing the weir structure to help flow pass through, I guess, a little faster, and therefore kind of mitigate that road crossing. So we did look at adding volume of the pond itself. We just felt like the effort, we were really trying to mitigate the road. So that was, we found with some, I guess, changes in the geometry of the weir, we were able to mitigate that.
And when you say road, do you mean a city road in Hunter's Crossing, or do you mean Highway 71?
It's Hunter's Crossing. the city
Okay.
road. Mhm.
Because I think a lot of that water too, and Fabiola, maybe you can help me with this, but doesn't it come from the detention pond at Burleson Crossing and then go across the highway? Or am I wrong with that?
I don't think so.
Okay.
That's what I was gonna, can you just clarify? I think the detention pond at Hunter's Crossing is just to address the flooding issues at Hunter's Crossing, right?
Correct.
Okay.
yeah,
I
I
thought
do
somehow
think
that
they're connected.
Burleson Crossing detention pond was creating issues going across the highway, but I could be totally mistaken with that. But I think that being number one on the list and knowing that's where all the development's going, that we should try to fix that. It should be number one if that's where all the
I
the
will
drainage
say,
is going.
so someone did already call and ask about how we analyzed it. We did analyze it with existing conditions, so it does not account for any additional development that could be ongoing upstream of it. With that, we would have to probably reevaluate what that looks like at the crossing.
Are there, so that concern, since we're just talking existing, and Sylvia brought up future, do we need to study, do we need to amend and look at parts of our B3 codes perhaps that could contribute even more to potential flooding? I mean, are there places we should look at a little closer in the B3 codes that could make this worse?
I would say another option, though, is as developers develop, making sure they have no downstream impact, that their discharge off their developed site is equal to or less than their actual proposed site, would essentially meet what these solutions are developed off of, because you're not changing existing.
And that's the case for areas within the Gills branch, but not throughout the city. So we give folks an opportunity to do like detention ponds and et cetera, et cetera. But in that Hunter's Crossing, I mean, we had a pre-development meeting this past week, 2,500 LUEs.
Have they had flooding over there?
Oh, yes.
I wasn't aware that
Consistently.
they had flooding.
Mhm.
So
And it's downstream. You don't hear about it because it's right on the other side of the county. As a matter of fact, the Hunter's Crossing PID board, we called a special meeting because the county needs access to go and assess, some of the downstream effects, because there are some residents there who continuously flood, even in the lightest rain.
and the detention pond is in the city. It's located
Yes.
in the city. I was just wondering if maybe there's
Yep,
something.
the folks on the back part of Hunter's Crossing in a rain are sweating it.
Well, didn't realize that.
And to an earlier point, that the deferred maintenance that now has been caught up on mitigated some of that, but it's still in existence. Just not as bad as it was, but it can get worse with more development.
And Mayor, doesn't it even go beyond Hunter's Crossing? I mean, they had a huge problem at Jacob's Landing, back in the other developments, back toward Shiloh too. So it's just not contained there. We send it all the way down the other way.
That water is
too.
conveyed, once it leaves Hunter's Crossing, it's conveyed into the county area. There were some extra culverts that were put in. There was some benching that took place, but all it did was exacerbate the problem further down, and further down.
Yep, so the no impact ordinance is step one, but within the B3 code itself, for example, parking in the second layer, and the density, right? Parking in the second layer adds impervious cover, and that increases the runoff. We also don't have creative solutions in our code, like capture it. Why don't you try to capture it and re-irrigate with it? We don't give any credit for those kinds of things. So our code right now just sheet flows and just passes it downstream, and we look at it just within this development, and if this development can deal with it, okay. So what they are raising is the much bigger picture, but my fear is we took into account existing conditions with not a whole lot of what's coming. That area off of Shiloh at 304, we just had a pre-development, 1,100 homes.
Well, I was just about to ask that, because if it's flowing that way, which is county, is there something that the city can do to work with the county to make that detention pond feasible for future development?
And it really is not a function of the county. The developer needs to. Yeah.
But on our part, we're
For
trying to
sure.
fix the detention pond, and
For
it
sure.
would benefit the county to help us with making that the best that it can be. Is there anything that we could do, or we just can't?
No, we The issue with Hunter's Crossing becomes they had capital impact fees as part of their public improvement district. And those commercial properties are paying the brunt of that. I don't know that they can sustain anymore. And legally, if we can charge them anymore, they've already paid their fees and they paid to highest and best use back then. So they're sort of caught up. This is going to be our expense.
I had a question again on, and I'm glad you asked about the density and what we currently have now, so we definitely need to look at that as we're rewriting pieces of the code, what we're doing and creating more pavement and more impervious cover. On the Highway 95 piece, and can you go back to the map again? I'm sorry. I guess that one will work. At where Gills Branch starts at 95, and that's all the, is it all the dark blue? Is dark blue Piney Creek? Oh, Gills, okay, right where your cursor is. So if there's a lot of vacant land right there. So if there was a detention pond there at the beginning of all this water, where it's starting at the bottom of that hill, would that help? And I doubt if you took that into your evaluation of everything, but would a retention at the beginning of all the water starting help with the downstream water?
So we actually had, not as part of the DMP, so HAF has been involved pretty intimately with the Gills Branch watershed. So back in 2017, I think, was when we first kind of did the FPP. Okay, and so that's the flood protection plan, and we evaluated both Piney and Gills Branch. And with that, we did look at mitigation. And so we found with Gills Branch that a reservoir would not kind of be able to slow the flow down enough to give enough detention. So, and then I do know when we did the mitigation alternatives as far as how we could design Gills Branch to be able to convey that 100-year flow, we even looked at detention kind of just adjacent to, or just north of Farm Street, adjacent to the Gills Branch stream, and that was not sufficient. So we ended up kind of, I do think with the design, we basically opened up this channel all the way through to Farm, but it is still relatively like a channel itself. So we couldn't, I guess, incorporating detention, we never felt like we offset enough of the flow to benefit the downstream impacts.
Oh, okay, and y'all, I'm sure you ran numbers on all that. So just building a detention to hold some of that water before it goes downstream won't help.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
On this page, on the ranking values, I guess I have two questions. The first one is there a deeper explanation of the model behind those numbers?
Yes, there is in the master plan. Once again, in the appendix, we had a spreadsheet, and you can see how each was ranked and valued.
Okay.
Did we send that to council yet? Yes.
And then I guess I'm not sure what metric I would want to use, but at the same time, I might want to look at additional metrics, like number of structures flooded, or some other way to look at it to see if there is another logical way to order it. How would one get the data to?
Yes, so it was part of our package, and so let me know if you need that again, but essentially, you'll be able to see how each were weighted. So, for example, public safety was weighted as far as frequency of storm event and impact or flooding risk. And then similar to economic, there was just ranges. So we could always, yes, you could always change the criteria of what is being influenced or, I guess, decreased, and then kind of change the values of those. And we also, kind of another thing we looked at was, I think, public safety was valued as 40%, whereas these other 3 or 4 elements took like 20%, 10 or 5. So all of that is, once again, built into that matrix. But the spreadsheet was a part of the package, so.
Are you referring to, when you say package, what's on the shared drive, the actual plan? Is that what you're referring to when you keep saying package?
I think what Ann shared with you, the Drainage Master Plan report, has the information on
Yeah.
how these projects were
Yeah.
scored and the criteria that was used. When we were using the criteria, what we were trying to do is based on the International Institute of Asset Management that use the triple bottom approach that recommends us using safety, environmental and social, and economic value. So we try to use that as part of this project. The only thing that we added as part of this project was project timing to see if we could combine with other projects.
I can't recall, but did that package also include information from the 2017 study and some of the recommendations from that 2017 study?
No, we did not include.
The master plan may mention, I think, but it didn't include the package on that study. But if you want that, I could try to
I
get
think it'd be
that.
nice for council to look at it and see what had been discussed before and to make a determination of whether or not it's something we want to continue to consider,
Okay.
at least from a study standpoint.
And this email that you're referring to from Ann, we got one for this meeting that was just a copy of this presentation. Is there another one that I'm not?
Yes, I thought she had sent it to you last week, the Drainage Master Plan report.
And it's
If you-
it's on the shared drive, in the council shared drive. I pulled
Okay.
it up this morning, yeah.
On the, your larger items up there, number 2 and number 5 and number 6, I guess, maybe number 9, too. There's multiple things that were in those, that were identified to accumulate those costs. So maybe like 5 or 6 road crossings. And I can use Chestnut Street as an example just because this crossing right here, it was calling for bigger concrete structures to get the water from one side of the road to the other. So is there a way we can identify those on one of the maps as to the cost for each one of those things so that we can just look at it in a high level, just like your map with the red dots, if we can put a dollar amount with each of those little dots and we can kind of see, because there's a lot of things that make up those $14 million and $25 million numbers, and we can maybe cherry pick some of those things to get them
Yes,
fixed.
so each project has an associated cost estimate. With that, you can see what the line items were, just like construction materials that we estimated it would cost to construct the solution. With that, we also put in I guess a large contingency, because there are, like I said, this is pretty high level projects that are not necessarily, I think the next stage would be moving into a feasibility, so they're pretty conceptual. So we put in like what the cost of utilities would be. We looked into maintenance. So we try to add other, I guess, considerations that could go into a project. So you should see all of those items. I will say one thing, these larger costs here, what you were mentioning, this project, this one, and this one, these are all storm drain solutions. And one of the big things that we found with our analysis is downtown Bastrop is pretty flat, which was a constraint as far as slope capabilities, as to get a conduit size to be, we're looking at really large conduit sizes because the slopes are so flat. So that was definitely a constraint, which I think is what drove up a lot of the costs that we are proposing here.
Yeah, so most of it, what I read anyway, was taking out a 12-inch pipe and putting in a 36-inch pipe on most of this flat area downtown. And I want to ask you one more time about the retention at 95 and where Piney Creek starts. So you said you didn't think a basin there or a large detention, you don't think that, I don't see how that wouldn't help if you can hold that water from coming downstream, how that wouldn't help.
Well, we looked at applying it a couple of things. So we couldn't get enough storage necessarily, right? So it kind of equates to like how much volume is coming in at that location. And at that location, it's really just, I think Gills Branch in itself is like 3 square miles. I think the headwaters is 1.5. So it's just being able to capture that and actually slow it down significantly enough. But we weren't able to slow it down enough and have enough storage. So we're kind of limited as far as like how deep we can actually make the pond. And so it just wasn't feasible to be able to like, you know, hold that whole first half before it's able to flush out.
Because it's so far upstream, because it's at the beginning of it then, right? If it was further, a little bit further downstream, would that help?
I guess it kind of depends on the watershed. One thing about the Gills Branch mitigation project is kind of naturally the railroad ended up being kind of like a detention structure because it is constraining. So the design itself kind of acts like an inline detention system. But yes, I think one of the big constraints was how much volume we could actually get at those locations, kind of based on elevation. One thing I did want to just kind of briefly talk about too is that we do know this is obviously, you know, kind of crazy as much as how much cost this will kind of surmount to. So a couple other things that are going on in the state that are really important is the flood plans. So if you aren't aware, the state has recently pursued the development of a flood plan for each region. So Bastrop in particular is in the lower Colorado Lavaca regional flood plan. With that, and actually HAF was leading that initiative and effort for the Texas Water Development Board. We did add a lot of these projects into the plan. Really what that will mean is that since the projects are now in the plan, whenever the plans kind of fully get implemented, more funding is going to become available this next year through FIF funding, the Flood Infrastructure Fund. And really, now that these projects are accounted for, Bastrop will be able to be applicable for, yeah. So all of these projects being represented in the floodplain is good in order to be able to potentially get funding from other sources.
So were we still waiting on a grant for Gills Branch? Or,
Yes.
right? We're still
Yes.
waiting on that. That hasn't ended, or we haven't got a denial on it?
Correct.
It's still, okay.
It is still out for, in the running, I guess. We did add that in the plan as a project, so, yes. Yes.
I didn't realize that was the grant.
Yes, so this would just be another opportunity to potentially find funding. It is still in the running currently for the grant that we've already previously pursued. These flood management evaluations just mean that these are areas where additional analysis, would be needed to be able to move it into a feasibility study, and then towards design. And then with that, I did want to, sorry, are there any other questions?
These estimated costs, is this like pre-inflation, post-inflation?
So they are based on construction costs from 2022, and then there's contingencies built into the project's costs, but not to his board. Yes.
Got it. But there's not like
but not-
2018 construction costs, for
Correct.
instance, right?
It's 2022, yeah.
Thank you.
Yes. So with that, we did want to take some time to talk about the drainage project. Nugent did a cost analysis to just kind of look over what potential funding would look like in the future. Do you want to use this?
All right, good evening, Mayor and Council. Matthew Garrett with Nugent Strategies and Solutions. Was able to present at your town hall eons ago, but Nugent's not a stranger to Bastrop. Chris Eckert has helped you with water and wastewater for some time, so I'm honored to be here in his place. I do a little more stormwater than he does nowadays. So you sort of saw $128 million worth of projects on $22 that we think are probably our problem, right? It's under current conditions, and you now have a challenge of deciding prioritization, also how to fund it. You clearly have more than one means to fund this. The city coffers have a lot of channels coming into them, but generally those are general tax revenues. You could do an impact fee on stormwater. It is eligible, though we haven't proposed that. Alternately, you could implement a drainage utility. That's allowed for under Texas Local Government Code 552. And so the cost of services that we included are all eligible. So it's governed not only by the statute that you can create this utility, but what you spend the money on, so that the fee stays a fee and is put to those uses as an enterprise fund. All right, so very simply, there are operation maintenance expenses. I think we talked a little bit about vegetation at one of your major waterways already. Maintenance of your waterways can be very important and help get the water where it needs to go. And so there's an idea that you need to do more of that. Today, as I understand it, you have that being done through your streets department. So we were able to pull from staff at the time the estimated work effort from that group that could be, not that it has to be, allocated or included in this potential utility. Additionally, we have the drainage improvements, pretty large stack of them there, 128 million to look at. And we looked at a couple other items related to additional maintenance needs in the future. So again, if you were only going to fund those capital projects, you have a big enough challenge, right, with either the current property tax limitations that you, I guess, have on the city and for the druthers of your residents. Additionally, we looked at the existing personnel, we looked at those new programs, and we had to do a metered approach because there's no way, I believe, to put a tenable, even drainage fee out there that could fund a quarter, of what you're doing in year one. So we understand that this is a big price tag, and that's going to have to be phased and funded over time. So again, we can talk about adjusting the 5-year business plan. It's certainly not mine to set the course for your project priorities. But for the items that I had collected, and that's about 25% of your streets using the 2023 budget, it did have a small administrative overhead portion, which was about $40,000. These are all subject to inclusion or exclusion at your preference. But if we included that and we included some additional staff, we have some professional services, because we're going to have these projects, we're going to need additional project management, I believe. Fabiola is the contract services we included in there. Additionally, there are some maintenance plans that should be put into place. There are some costs in setting those up. So those are baked in. That is about $660,000. So the HAF team put together an impervious area analysis. That's how I came up with this up to $6 amount. This is based on your revenue potential, based on the residents and the impervious square footage of your commercial properties. If we were to fund the capital, and you have this in the report, maybe an appendix of the original there on the shared drive, I believe, but you'll see that we only got the first 2 projects for $10 because we had plus or minus 15, 16 million there. If I was to debt fund that, and my rule of thumb is $1 million of debt's about $75,000 a year, and so if I'm going to generate enough to make those debt payments on a 20-year note, you would need about $10 to fund just those first 2 projects, if solely from this revenue source. Okay. Obviously, we didn't get them all, but
Can
we
you
could go up to
explain what you mean by the $6.10? I'm not following.
Oh, sure. And I don't know if we do a better job. I don't know if the order here is different, but I think we got to the end of the story before I got to the nuts and bolts. But with the end in mind, when I start talking fees, people want to know the dollar amount. So I think that's why we organized it this way. So to answer your question, if we were to fund operations, so this is a new conceptual utility, right? This is setting aside an enterprise fund, just like your water and sewer fund. Dedicated revenues, dedicated expenses. And those expenses, if you were to categorize a portion of your current streets budget and a small portion of your current administration budget, if you were to add in a new project manager, you were to add in another maintenance worker, you would have an annual budget that's approximately $600,000. To fund that, with our known billing determinants, our ability, we believe, to bill based on every home having a fee and the commercial properties having their ratable fee, and I'll get into how that works in just a minute, that would amount to about $6.
A month?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And how did you determine which properties were eligible for this fee?
So the statute limits you to your city limits, with maybe a few exceptions for Edwards Aquifer Recharge Zone, but we didn't take that as an exception because that's your service area.
Well, but it's not our water service area.
No, sir, not at
Yeah.
all. This is, so again, the HAF team looked against your appraisal district records for those that are in your taxing entity.
Mhm.
Additionally, spatially, they took the footprint of city limits. And I didn't do the GIS work on this, and I don't think we have that staff here tonight. But we did try to limit it to your potential billing area
Mhm.
and wouldn't have extended beyond that.
But so for people that are in another water service area that don't get water from the city of Bastrop, but they're inside the city limits, they would just have a bill for $6 a month for this.
They could. You could also pay annually. City
Okay.
of Houston does annualized bills. They could do quarterly bills, and I think you have a solid waste service that you could also use. Are you already contracting that out? Yeah, so this would be another line item potentially on their water bill, and so you'd have maybe a small administrative service fee to those entities as a result.
Maybe? Yeah.
And perhaps it wouldn't add anything to your current administrative service fee because it's just adding one more row and it's sort of a set it and forget it on every account. That's subject to, I guess, we didn't go that far, right? We're very early in feasibility, but great question. We understood we had a means to collect this revenue.
Okay.
And so again, that's $6 if we were to bake in everything that I was given as an opportunity to include in this. And then for capital, another 10 to 29, potentially. And again, those are stretch numbers, I know, but we did have a big daunting CIP in front of us. So kind of getting into the initial cost, again, this kind of talks about how I built up the original 600,000 or so. We have the current operations on the far left. You have some additional costs, 450. Some of those are one-time expenses or overtime. Not overtime for staff, but over time you would experience those increases in staff potentially. And then lastly, your annual debt service, approximately 1.1 million to 3.3. If you were to fund, as you see in the rightmost circle there, $10 of the fee to get 15 million, 29 to get 43.4. And so even if it were 29, I would be getting you a third of the way there. And again, the master plan, and no master plans I've worked on have assumed the staff is going to go fix it all in 1 year. So that's not to say you should, certainly. And ma'am, did you have a question?
I do. I do. So the $6 a month is only going to help us with existing maintenance and operations, right?
Yes, yes, ma'am.
So in order to, and then in order to achieve the actual projects, is that $29 including the $6 or $29 on top? So that's another whole. $35 to get 1/3 of the. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah.
Not a proposed solution, of course. This was feasibility. And we would certainly look at comparators around you and talk about what is a reasonable figure for this. And I know you would all wrestle yourselves with that very question.
Which is my point about development agreements that did not include annexation will now bite us in the butt for the next 20 years. either. I came in the middle of all this.
Yeah. I feel your pain. I started my career in government, and I've been in city's shoes before. It's not fun. So, new challenges. So, this is really showing you very, hopefully simply and visually, what a $10 component for capital alone would get you relative to those projects. Again, I just assumed the priority ranking as originally assigned, and so you'll see that $12 of funding. The difficulty with debt funding is you do it and maybe you execute in 3 years, but for 17 more years you're paying that same note. And so you can't compound these and ultimately stack them on top of each other with stacking the relative revenue. Now, this doesn't assume a lot of funding or grant opportunities or developer matching. This is not a bleak forecast either. I think it's very realistic. If anything, it's a little shy because I think the gentleman pointed out at the end, we haven't inflated these costs, and we've seen some substantial inflation.
And Councilmember Lee, this proposal is also a fee. It's not an impact fee to new development, the way you saw the transportation impact fee. And so we may want to do a combination of both of those things to keep the upward pressure from just the city limit residents, so that it includes all new developments as well.
My concern goes back to the same thing that my concern was for the impact fees. You were asking residents in those areas that have paid taxes for years, some for a lifetime, to now pay for the problem that the city's created, and for growth. We're having to pay now for growth. And it's a fee that we can't control the amount of rain, right? And so a fee is usually you're paying a fee for service, some type of service. So my house may have far less impervious cover than my neighbor's house, but I got to pay the same $35 they got to pay, and they're causing more of the problem. So where do you balance that out? I had a friend that the other day that called and asked to borrow $30. They needed $30 more to pay their rent, and you're talking that's $30 that they won't have to pay their rent. The true story. So it's just we're just nickel and diming our residents. I know that it's necessary. I mean, you get it. I know that it's necessary. We need to fix the problem. I just nickel and diming our residents to death to not even get a third of what needs to be done. I would think that a resident would probably say, if it ain't going to get 80% done, don't take my $6.
Well, that's why we're looking at all the different funding opportunities, so we can find some way to pay for it, because we all have to pay for it, and we don't want to $6 anybody to death. We're doing it with the street, we're doing it with the drainage, we're doing it with our utility bills, but all of it costs money, and then we can't really keep neglecting all of it. We've got to fix. That's why I was hoping if we can get a map and kind of pinpoint maybe the areas that would get the water out the quickest out of Gills Branch, and if some of the lines from Gills Branch to the river that go through town and down the street, down Farm Street or Spring Street or Cedar Street, maybe those can be sized, and we can do that first and get a 36-inch line to replace a 10-inch line and get the water out a little quicker to help with some of it. That way we can prioritize to get the water out the quickest. I was hoping that the detention at the beginning, or maybe even in the middle of the Gills Branch, would help, because that's the cheapest thing you can do, is dig a hole and fill it with water. And if that helps you collect it to hold it long enough to get the water downstream, then that's the least expensive option, in my opinion, to do that, rather, on top of everything else. But if that's a temporary solution, and there's a lot of empty land on Gills Branch that's flood land and can't be used, and maybe that we can have option for some of that.
Well, a large part of the Gills Branch.
Just something else to remember is the Gills Branch solution or mitigation design does incorporate the upgrade and modification to those road crossings too, because those are also really large obstructions as far as the channel being able to convey. So it's Farm, Chestnut, and Pine that all get turned into bridges, which is really kind of another big cost as far as that solution to kind of redo the structure and the road through those portions. But yes.
Wasn't there some consideration to benching serving somewhat as the same as the detention pond, so your area which water is moving has been expanded quite a bit? Wasn't that a solution that we had discussed?
As far as channel benching, yes, that is also what we did. So there's channel benching basically starting at the railroad and going all the way upstream to just downstream of SH 95.
So that combined with a detention pond, wouldn't it slow down and allow us to capture more water inside those catchment areas as opposed to on the streets and in the houses?
Well, really all of that detention or channel modifications helps keep the flow of Gills Branch in the channel itself. There is, as I mentioned during our rapid assessment, there is still that local runoff that's occurring. And there are some detention ponds that are already in place kind of in between Gills and the railroad. So yes, I mean, those should be able to hold, if they're designed correctly, the runoff from those local sites to detain them. But I think ultimately kind of similar, if I take the data we collected of the storm drains in downtown, just that downtown area that I was showing, the average size of a pipe is 2 feet. So there's just not a lot of subsurface conveyance that's being available. And then we don't even know if, like, the inlets are, capable of capturing that. That was not a part of our analysis necessarily, but.
Just let me make one note to everybody on council. Moving forward, high-density projects in the town, i.e. Farm Street Village, we're going to have to really be concerned about how we move forward, because this is bad, but we can make this a lot worse if we continue that way.
If all of these things were to be funded and built, and we had a 100-year storm, what flooding would we have at that point?
Yes. So, I mean, take City of Austin, for example. They still struggle with flood issues. It's kind of an ongoing concern. I will say for the the projects that deal with storm drain, we did size the storm drains to 25-year storm, just because that is based on the criteria in your drainage manual.
So,
The answer is even if we spent $120 million and taxed our residents $85 a month to get through these projects, we would still flood in a 100-year storm.
and you said you sized the drainage for 25-year. So that means just over the term of paying for it, you would likely flood them one time anyway.
Correct.
But the flooding would be definitely reduced, and it does eliminate some people from flood risk. So if you look at the Gills Branch flood design, we were able to eliminate like 200 structures from just the riverine.
So
I don't have
200
that.
structures, 14 million divided by 200 structures is how much? And would I be better off in a buyout at that point?
Yes.
That there is no ROI enough for that number. Now, if you'd have told me 20,000 structures, absolutely. I mean, I know council gets nervous when 11 people show up, much less 200 people show up because their house flooded. I get it. It's a horrible thing. I've lived it, done it, went and did the flood assessment afterwards. But again, from the point of how much can the residents bear, and I know I know you guys are not the bad guys. You did the study. We've created our own mess over a period of X amount of years and development and growth. But when I've got to go sell it to John Q. Public, who can't make rent at $30, I mean, that's a super consideration for the city. A $14 million investment is going to save how many homes?
Help me quantify like a 25-year or 100-year storm event. So, 10 inches of rain in one day, 20 inches of rain, I mean, yeah, like help me quantify it in something that might make more sense than just,
Well, we've also had 500-year floods in the past 10 years, probably.
I don't think it's
So
gonna
it's,
be
we've had abnormal,
no, that's fine, but
Right.
I'm just like,
Yeah.
what is this? It was designed for a 25-year flood event for some of the engineering, so I'm just contemplating, how much rain is that?
I
Over
wanna
what period
say
of
the
time?
100-year is, oh, sorry.
No, go ahead, yeah.
So you're quoting my memory now. It's Friday afternoon, guys. So I would say, I think the 100-year, and it is in the DCM, or the storm manual. I think it's 12.4 inches in a 24-hour period is your max storm event for a 100-year. I don't know the 25-year off the top of my head, so.
Okay, so about a foot in 24 hours is 100-year.
That's true, yeah.
And rain doesn't really work like that. So, but is that spread out over a 24-hour period evenly, or because usually what we get are flash storms where we may get 2 inches in an hour, and then
So we look at all of those scenarios. So for a 24-hour storm, we evenly distribute that rainfall. But there are other like depth and durations that are considered in those frequency curves. So it can kind of vary. We look at, in our modeling, we have anywhere from 15-minute increments to like 3 hours, or, and that changes. The depths change with, the intensity can change through those curves. But you're right. Like, I actually looked up the 2018 storm event, and it was like less than a 25-year event. But you had a lot of people report flooding, so it just kind of elevates the concern that people are experiencing it when really maybe Bastrop hasn't experienced or Gills Branch hasn't experienced like a 100-year storm. But, it still obviously does not have the capacity to do that. I mean, it is statistics too, so you're only bargaining on when it will actually happen.
So of the cities that you have here that we were compared to, do we have any idea of how we are compared to them in actual terms of flooding and infrastructure? For instance, Taylor, you have here at $4. Well, no, I think it might be a little under $4, maybe three. I'm sure that $3 is not fixing and saving all of their city from flooding, but I just wonder, in comparison, how flooded are we compared to Taylor at $3 a month?
So it's going to be a combination, because a lot of cities deal with their stormwater as part of their street budget. When you're building a street, you're go ahead and capturing the drainage system that goes along with that street. We haven't dealt with it that way. And then it depends on how they're building too, and how they're borrowing. If it has a $3 fee, chances are a great amount of that debt is funded by general fund. Or if they have a street tax or something else, there's just different pots of money that they're moving it into. Generally, a fee that low is going to kind of be a pay-as-you-go. They've probably put that $3 fee, much like the $6 fee, into maintenance and operations. That $3 fee is not
Not
big debt.
fixing their,
No, it's not big debt.
any drainage
No,
issues that
it's
they're
not big
having.
debt.
Well-
Mostly maintenance and operations.
So what are our other funding? What are our other funding options? I don't know that we ever got that far.
Sure. Well, we showed a few, not to get my soapbox out, but you mentioned impact fees, and I've heard growth, and I don't even know all B3's details. But if growth is going to have a substantial impact, your impact fees are not straddling current residents, but only growth. And so again, I've done those across the state. I think they're vital. We most recently helped Houston update theirs this last year, or this year, beginning of the year. So that's one avenue to get what's not shown. Again, these are the current conditions. But for those future conditions, I think it does behoove your current residents, if council looks at an impact fee, which could help offset ultimately that dollar amount that comes back to the property tax, whether that's M&O for maintenance or INS for capital. The other funding options, of course, are grant opportunities. I think HAF may be shepherding some of that with you. Those loans, there's some big dollars out there, but they're spread pretty thin. I know there are some recipients, I can't recall who exactly, that were receiving $9 million or so out of that first tranche, or is it last year's FIF funding that went in? Yeah.
I don't know if I can speak to
Subject to
that,
check.
but I will say that as a state, I think the fifth funding for this next year, to our recollection, there's 600 million out there for the state to be able to propose projects and get funding. And that's specifically from the pool of the fifth. And there are other opportunities such as the CBD MIT grant. There's still funding available in that pot as well. So ultimately, there are various grant opportunities out there that could benefit, as well as be able to pay for the projects.
Yeah, and it goes a long way to have your projects listed. There's a portal right now for the fifth funding. You can go look at where those dollars land, how much each city got. Sometimes there are, to some earlier point, county and city cooperative efforts, right, where they have joint pain points in that same funding source. But do you have others that you were going to speak to? I didn't mean to overtalk you.
No.
Okay, fair enough.
So just to be clear on the impact fee.
Yes, sir.
That cannot be used to fix drainage in existing areas, but only drainage in growth areas where the new projects are going. Is that correct?
More specifically to impact fees. Impact fees can be charged to development anticipated over the next 10-year period for their impact on the infrastructure needs. So if a current resource needs to be upsized, those 12 to 36 inch, then their portion ratably, right? They're not going to pay for that 12-inch replacement, but that next 24 inches could certainly be, again, per unit, not whole enchilada. They're not going to pay for all of it, but they will pay for their increment that growth will require to support growth. So too with your roadway and all the exercises you went through recently, it sounds like. I didn't... Yes, ma'am. So again, that's one opportunity. Do you want me to go back, Fabiola? Okay.
Well, but I kind of feel like the answer to my yes/no question was that the impact fees can only be levied for growth.
Yes.
That when we talk about flooding in the central of downtown Bastrop with no new development, that an impact fee is not going to help us with that.
Sure. So maybe two examples, if
Yeah.
I may. One, I work with a city that built a reservoir in the 1950s, and it was on their impact fees in 2018 when I updated them, even though that cost was fully paid for, debt and sunk cost. The next unit of growth that came in benefited from that water supply, right? So bringing it back to stormwater and Bastrop, some of these projects are for upsizing downtown. And so while it has a big price tag, is that true that we have some downtown, I believe I heard, maybe the mayor said from 12 to 36 inch? Is that correct? Yes. Okay, and so to that extent, even though that is the solution that's recommended, that has some forward vision, it may not have been modeled with future conditions, but it wasn't nearsighted and forgot to think about upsizing. So there's a portion of some of these dollars that are and will support growth. Additionally, some things you put in the ground today may be half utilized. And if that same conduit or area is to support the extra half of the capacity is for growth, I can come back and look at the cost that you've already paid and attribute that in portion, pro rata, back to the growth that's coming. So that's why it's a maybe, 100%, because we can only look at new projects, which is probably the easiest approach to impact fees, but you're probably missing a fair amount of potential in your maximum fee that you could assess.
If you look at the list there, the highest ones have a river running through the middle of them, like us. The other ones don't have that problem. So I think that's
Man.
correlated.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you
Slide
were talking
20,
about the list
yeah.
of projects. Sorry, sir.
No, those two, so Austin and Austin and San Marcos were one of the highest ones. Those two have a river running through them. Most of the ones above that line don't. And so I think that's contributing to the issues that our landscape and terrain here is just not letting it run off quick enough because it's all running through us to get to the river.
There's quite a bit of difference between College Station and Bryan. They're right there with each other, and that just, is that more of a policy?
Population?
Well, they're pretty similar in population right now.
Yeah, and topography wise, it's pretty similar. It's,
Yeah.
It's just a matter of the way they're funding it, apparently.
Yeah.
And,
Could be
and
just
there's
a
not a river.
policy.
Obviously, they're
Yeah.
in the Brazos River Valley, but they're not, that close to the Brazos.
Right.
All right. And then not shown on this chart is one of the top on mine is Lubbock, relatively flat at $21 a month. So different issues, different politics, different rates. Absolutely. Yes, sir. Yeah. Okay. And I'm going to go back, Fabiola's suggestion. I kind of glossed over or skipped through a few things, and I'm not qualified to drive. My apologies. All right, so we are here. So very simply, wanted to talk through the impervious area analysis, and I'm happy to speak to it. Was that the intent, Stephen, or did you want to take these? Okay, so while I didn't do this, the impervious area is effectively concrete and rooftop and other areas, even compact soil from driving over it constantly could be impervious. And you'll see we have the items listed that would be the impervious area of this subject property. This is a residential unit. From an analysis of, there's a state code in your appraisal district data, it's A1. We use that as an indicator for single-family residential. Helps us make this a lot simpler from parcels. That should exclude inventory as well. So these are homes that are occupied and constructed. So we try to get the best measure we can. We came up with an ERU value, that is the equivalent residential unit of 3238 square feet. Right, so that is effectively the average impervious area of your residence.
Divided by what's the average lot size?
I did not get the average lot
So
size.
what percentage is that, is my question.
Oh, I don't have that handy. I didn't do the analysis, and I apologize. Some communities actually look at the percent impervious relative to lot size in their calculation. Most do not, but that's a good point. Some certainly look at that as an option.
Well,
So-
and I say that from a planning perspective as we talk about what should those densities be, and it's obvious in our most problematic areas in our core, higher density equals bad. I can't deal with the water now, much less adding 5, 6, 7, 10 units on the lot.
Fair.
Is probably not a smart thing. And so if we look at it from a percentage perspective as a planner, I would say, okay, let's keep impervious cover to under 3,500 square feet. And so that I'm not having an impact to the downstream, right? And if you talk about, okay, well, who pays it? Who pays it when you're building? Go up beyond that 3,500 square foot number and we're going to have a problem. And you mitigate it by capture, you mitigate it by other creative solutions, but from a planning and a zoning perspective, we're going to be talking to our community later on. This is a super important number for me. November 14th, I'm going to be explaining this number to folks and why these densities are not sustainable for some of our areas. You can't. You see the number now. You just can't do it. It's a $120 million price tag to keep doing what we're doing in the B3 code.
All right. Fair enough.
Yeah, because I do think the lot size is important to consider, because you may have lots that are net absorbers of water, if a big enough lot with a small enough impervious cover, that may be helping the situation, and those people should be encouraged, and the ones who are, yeah.
And just for context, the B3 is the name of our building code, and it recommends, or I guess you might even use the word requires, the driveway to go around the house and have parking not in the first layer, so in the rear or on the side potentially. And it allows for 2 accessory dwelling units also on the property, with no setbacks and no minimum impervious cover requirements, and no minimum lot size. So the typical, there haven't been a lot of properties built under this building code, but it allows for something that looks nothing like that.
And that's actually discouraged.
Actually, yeah, that's not allowed. Not discouraged, it's disallowed, yeah.
Sure.
And that's why I keep saying we've got to address this with the codes, because it's bad, but it can get a lot worse if we don't.
Yeah. Now, all great points. I'm certainly not qualified to go into policy, but I know there are a lot of things you can do to mitigate. And I've certainly worked with a number of communities that are doing that on low-impact development and some other things. So subject to B3, and I don't know how it folds into this unless it's true, that may not be single-family, or perhaps it is. Other than single-family, though, I wanted to show you how we do the non-residential. Non-residential does not mean, and I should change that, it's non-single-family residential. It could be a residential use at an apartment complex, but because it has multiple units and because it's not single-family residential, we would look at their lot, and let's just pretend this was that same apartment. Here's a building, here are 2 points of, a number of points, I guess, in and out, and their parking lot. They have 10,000 square feet. Using this 3238, pretty simple math, it's 3.1 ERUs, or equivalent residential impervious area. And so this, and this may not be representative of an apartment at 3, would pay 3 times that of your resident. That said, of your residents, I think we had about 3,400 at the last time I sampled, and our ERUs represented from the non-residential group is 6,300 plus or minus. So that's convenient math for me, that's about 60+% of the revenue stream from this fee type would go from non-residential, and you could contrast that with your property tax percent yield from any customer class and see which is most advantaged to your residents from that perspective. So for instance, if they paid 50% of the property taxes and they only paid 30-something% of this, the same dollar yield would come at a lesser cost to your residents. Just food for thought.
Now, that is, I will say, that's one good thing in the B3 code, that it encourages you to not overpark, because that's all runoff. I mean, that's,
Yeah, so this is sort of nuts and bolts again. We do back off about 10%. Our stats from a few studies say commercial is going to have 5% attrition, turnover we won't collect, and they're a big part of our revenue stream, so we want to account for that. Additionally, the city has given us no direction to even start the utility, so we haven't started down the path of discretionary exemptions, which are allowed for in state code. So that said, we think you have about 9,200 billable units. That math does feed back into all of those original dollar figures of revenue potential, which is in the report. That report's dated now, of course, by a while, and its half-year implementation in year 1 is notably less than year 2 because we anticipated starting this midway through this current fiscal year, originally. And so again, as stated, these cities don't have your same topography, they don't have your same residents. I can tell you from experience, we helped implement Bernie's. Bernie purposed to have a property tax component and this revenue component. They did put both streams into a dedicated utility, but I can tell you they're not funding, I think, as you pointed out, everything they need from that. Additionally, you have a lot of roadway projects that include drainage. Some cities actually purpose to maintain, if it's a part of a major roadway, we're going to go ahead and do the curb and gutter as a part of our street INS portion, right, of the tax rate. So not only do you have a lot of decisions about the priorities and the fee potential, you can also slice and dice your various revenues a lot of ways to accomplish this end wherever you land on a priority.
I think that's a very good point because, I mean, we are working on streets too. We do have a plan for that. How feasible is that to, as we repair our streets or we go through that process to upgrade our gutters and our drainage that way using that half a cent? That's a very good point. I've already started on an exemption list for you, so I can email that to you if you need. Got one down for you, but yeah, I mean, I looking at it today. Austin actually has a little calculator. You can go in there and plug in your square footage of your property, and based on what your square footage is, I came out at like $1.40 or something like that. But that goes back to the whole, that's not fixing the drainage issue. So, I mean, I don't know where we go from here. I know I have Willy Wonka that I gotta go to here, but.
We go to a complete relook. We look at maintenance real hard first. We get past November 14th, hear what the folks at the tables have to say about, do they like the density? Do they want to continue down this path? And if so, this is the dollar impact it's going to have. You know, I think our residents need to understand, just like with the transportation impact fee, this is a potential cost that, you know, we're looking at if we continue down the same road we've been on. This is the price tag.
Because we're growing, we're gonna become more dense. So you ask that question. So if they say, well, no, I don't want to go down that path, then we say, okay, well, we're not allowing any more development.
I think you have to have the real hard conversation about development in the areas that are already problematic in the core. That's like the first question that we need to get real clarity on. But the second area is like the Hunter's Crossing area with, you know, 2,500 units potentially coming. I think you have to look at an impact fee. I think they have to pay their effect, and an ordinance amendment similar to what we have for Gills Branch, that you should have a net zero. You know, you shouldn't cause any more issue. But again, those are, and that's an easy one. That, I mean, we can get that ordinance on the books by November. That one's not a hard one. The issue becomes, okay, so we fix Hunter's Crossing, let's just say, because that's the first one on the list. We fix Hunter's Crossing. It's everything else down upstream from the county that's getting built that's going to come and have an impact anyway. So it's more than just, I'm going to pass a $35 bill onto the residents. It's a much bigger conversation than that. I think impact fees is the place you start. How do we balance that with the transportation ones? And then a real good and hard conversation with the county on what are they doing with master basin planning. And then 3, a real good and hard look at our own public works on maintenance. I think those are the 3 things we have to do at the same time, and we have to do them now.
And writing up our future development agreements to capture all of this, because I don't think our development agreements that are on for the immediate ones that are coming on aren't written to help with any of this stuff. So we have to be real smart with the development agreements that we're going to be writing for everything that we don't know that's coming, because it's coming. It's all coming. So.
Well, y'all did a wonderful job. Thank y'all so much. You are awesome. It's not you. It's us.
Does anybody have any questions for our presenters? Any further questions other than making the pain go away? Not sure.
I'd like to see, and I mentioned this, and I saw Fabiola writing it down, but if we could get on one of the maps, if we could just get the dollar amounts for each of those things, so we could look at it on one picture and have a dollar planted on the crossing here or wherever it's at, and I think that would help us.
Robert, do you guys have the GIS layer you can send to them?
He has the layer.
Okay. So I think that'll help us have a discussion about it, and then help us prioritize where we want to spend money and how much it's going to be to get stuff out of here. And I like the rating system you used was great, because that's going to help us identify what's the worst and put that at the top. So thank you for putting all that together for us.
Councilmember Crouch is absolutely correct. The more well-informed we are, the better. Yes.
Also, if there's any way, I know this would be a big ask, but if we overlay the street reconstruction with the drainage then that's going to create some savings. I would think a really nice chunk of savings, in those areas where, we're not catching anything. Everything's running in bar ditches. And, so if we put those pipes in the ground at the same time that we build the street, then we're not tearing up the street and we're not repaving the street, which is all included, I'm sure, in your cost estimates for putting those pipes in the ground, so.
So the streets are not part of the cost estimates of this, yeah.
Totally understood, but
But that's a great point, because we are looking at some of the streets right now that are probably going to be reconstructed. Once we looked at that, the intent was to rehab, and we started looking, okay, does water needs to be addressed, wastewater, and we looked at the recommendations, part of the drainage master plan, and we are including that as part of the project. So the driver in this case was the streets, but we also need to look at the other infrastructures because we don't want to inconvenience the residents more than we need to, and plus, like, you don't want to tear up the streets and then realize that you have to deal with the other assets later, right? I mean,
Yeah, we need to look at them jointly, so maybe when we do a street, we put the bigger pipe in at the same time, and it's a combination of both of these costs in one street or one area, so we can get all the water in a new street with it. So cost is going to be both. So we're looking at $200 million instead of $100 million, potentially.
Madam City Manager, you have any words of wisdom or consolation for us?
She's like, not right now, not today.
I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news on a Friday.
It's being
This-
realistic.
This is the unintended consequence of everything we're doing and that's happening.
Deferred maintenance and poor code. We appreciate y'all coming out. If no one has any further questions, we will close this meeting. Thank y'all so much.
You're up.
We don't have to
No.
do that, do we?
move to adjourn.
Second.